Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bread of Life channel. I am here with David Neff, and he shares a common interest with me. We love looking into textual criticism and different topics related to the Bible. So welcome, David.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. It is so good to see you, my friend. This is our third chat now. Our first one was on Messianic prophecies, and our second one was on the resurrection, and now we're talking about textual variations. And this is probably going to end up being a multi-part series. And just because there is so much to talk about and there is so much to really cover, we really can't do it justice in a half-hour, 2-hour long episode. So you could pretty much spend an entire semester teaching this stuff just on one book alone in a college level class. So we're never going to be able to do this justice, but it is still very interesting to talk about the stuff that I really enjoyed studying.
Me too. And I think for those watching, you will be really enriched by this. We're going to look at some of the oldest manuscripts that we have. You're going to see actual images of some of the oldest manuscripts. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about some of the textual variants in the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark. And so I kind of wanted to start. Well, first, let me say, please subscribe to David Neff. His link to his YouTube channel is in the description of this video. Let's help him build his channel.
And yes, and don't forget, if you're not subscribed to Rebecca, subscribe to her as well. Help her build her channel as well.
Thank you. So I guess for me, I want to just start by letting Christians know something that is probably pretty important to know. There's a lot of Christians that have this idea that the Bible is just like a perfect book that has come to us and every word is from God. And it's kind of an unrealistic view. Now, I'm a person who believes the Bible is inspired by God, but you have to understand that any translation of the Bible that you're reading, well, it's translated, first of all, so there's room for issues there. But what are they translating it from? We do not have the autographs, the original documents that were written down that became part of the New Testament. We have copies, and those copies have textual variations. So you could call those contradictions, right? And so we have to this is what the field of textual criticism does. It tries to resolve these contradictions and figure out, what was the original meaning. So me and David are just going to look at some of those variants today. David, do you want to say any more?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the first thing is to kind of just give an overview of what the problem is. So in the Greek New Testament, there are about 138,000 words or so, give or take. However, there are an estimated 400,000 variants within the New Testament manuscripts, which means that there are more variants than there are words in the actual New Testament. That being said, the vast majority of these really don't matter at all. They are minor spelling changes in word orders, and these really do not change the overall meaning. They are neither meaningful nor are they viable. And I would say of those, the vast majority probably can't even be translated into English. I wanted to read this. Sentinel Apologetics. Hey, David, I'm currently writing a commentary on Mark. I'm up to Mark 14:28 and so far at 590 pages. I've dealt with all of these so-called contradictions. So we're not really talking about contradictions within the New Testament itself, but rather within the actual manuscripts. So that might be a comment you want to highlight. I do actually, Sentimental Apologists, I really would love for you to send me what you have. But these aren't contradictions that we're talking about, just textual criticisms, so to speak. Contradictions between actual manuscripts.
I have to admit the contradictions was a little bit of clickbait. But I mean, I don't think it's completely inaccurate because these are variants, so they do contradict each other. So should we just go ahead and jump into it?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to begin with Mark 1, verse number 1. Most scholars would say that Mark was the first book of the New Testament. Excuse me, I cannot talk tonight. The first gospel written. And so the prologue of Mark reads, "The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah. Look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, the voice of one shouting in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make his path straight." So there is a textual variance within this verse, whether or not the original manuscripts read Jesus Christ or Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And the way that you read this actually does change the overall meaning of the verse and gives you a different understanding of the theology, so to speak. So I want to read this, and then as soon as I read this short thing, I'll kick it back off to you. This is the commentary from the New English Translation. They say, or lack, Son of God. Both Irenaeus and Epiphanius additionally lack Son of God, while virtually all the rest of the witnesses have the words. So evidence seems to argue for the authenticity of the Son of God. So they argue that most likely the words omitted by accident in some witnesses, since the last 4 words in the manuscripts would have looked, and I wish I could say this, with all of the successives and the accidental deletions is likely. Further, the inclusion here finds its complement in 1539, where the centurion claims that Jesus was the Son of God. So that's one of the possibilities that the NET has suggested. I'll take it right back up to you.
Okay. Yeah. And by the way, for those, unfamiliar with David, he is an atheist. I'm a Christian. And it's exciting to me that we're going to have this conversation together. And we're kind of like, we don't have to be opposed to each other or anything like that because, we're both seeking truth. And so we just want to actually look at what the reality is about the scripture. And one thing I appreciate about you, David, is how much time you've spent studying this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, so, and I would actually, and I would say that this is a big issue for me because studying the textual variants and studying the issues of messianic prophecies and all is kind of what started leading me towards the path of deconversion. And so I always find these to be very interesting. I don't know if you can hear it, but the ice cream truck is in my neighborhood. It's coming through to my earphones. I can hear
it a little bit, but it's not bad. Yeah. It's not bad.
Okay, that's good because I can hear it very clearly through my headphones. I don't know if you can hear it or not.
It's getting louder now. You can mute yourself temporarily because I'm about to do. Okay, so I'm going to pull up. These are some of the earlier manuscripts that we have. And so for those who are not that familiar with textual criticism, with early New Testament manuscripts, there are really 3 main categories of these variants that we talk about. So they're kind of divided up between the Byzantine text, the Alexandrian text, and the Western texts. So, how similar one manuscript is to another, they tend to group in these 3 different groupings. So this is from a 5th century Codex Bezae, which is considered a Western text. And Mark 1:1 does contain Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is Jesus. Oh, wait, I guess you can't see can you see my pointer when I'm can you see my arrow? No, probably not.
No, okay. No, I cannot see your cursor.
Okay. So, but the part I've underlined says Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's a 5th century text. You have. Go ahead.
Okay, I can see it now. I see the red underlines, and that's what you were talking about.
Oh no, I was talking about my cursor. I was moving it around.
Okay.
So you were right. You were right. Okay. And by the way, for each one of these different passages that we're going to talk about, I tried to pull one example from each of the various texting groups, like one from the Alexandrian, one from the Byzantine, and one from the Western. So here's an example of Mark 1:1 from the Codex Alexandrinus from the 5th century. And it also says Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So both from the Western and from the Alexandrian text, we have example of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, where the controversy sort of comes in is with this manuscript. This is the Codex Cyanaticus, and it's an earlier manuscript. It's from the 4th century. Now, this is where the drama is, okay, is because it says Jesus Christ, and it does say Son of God, but it's very tiny. It's actually the scribe squeezed it in. Okay, so either the scribe didn't write it at first, and then it was added later. And I have a close-up of this. Let me show you where it was squeezed in. Okay, see how tiny it is right there? That's where it says the Son of God. So either the scribe just forgot, like, because these letters are quite similar. So either he just forgot and then he went back and stuck it in. He realized his mistake and he went back and stuck it in, or it could have been added at a later time. And so this is where the disagreement is, because we can't be absolutely certain, although I'd say that handwriting looks similar. So it looks like it was the same scribe.
Yeah, so, I was actually going to say the same exact thing. Sentinel apologizes. You tried to actually really interesting comment you might want to highlight. David, did you know that there's a cool variant in Mark 1:1 that adds the words "the son of Abraham"? I did not.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Oh, yeah. Rob, I'm so glad you're here, because Rob probably has a lot of cool facts to share with us. So I hope he'll be able to stick around and share some other cool facts. And actually, Anam put a great comment too. Cyanaticus is from St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt. Yes. And what's so cool about Codex Cyanaticus is that it was lost. It was like basically it was undiscovered for like 1,000, no, more than 1,000 years. Okay, I'd have to go back and look. It was discovered within the last 200 years. So for like, let's see, if it's a 4th century, I mean, I'm not good at math, guys, but there quite a long time, more than 1,000-year period, maybe a 1,500-year period where this manuscript was hidden. So, for those who try to say, oh, the Bible has been altered, how do we know that somebody hasn't like changed all the manuscripts, or, well, this is good evidence that the Bible has not been changed. We've discovered not just the Codex Cyanaticus, but many manuscripts that were just hidden or buried or something for so long. And then when we discovered them, they very nicely corresponded to the newer manuscripts that we have. Okay, so actually that Mark 1:1 is the least controversial of these things that we're discussing today. And especially because let's just say that the Son of God wasn't in the Codex Cyanaticus. Well, later on in the book of Mark, Jesus is referred to as the Son of God. So even if it didn't say that in Mark 1:1, it doesn't really change Christian thinking about Jesus being the Son of God. Absolutely. I just wanted to put it up there because it was fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I would actually tend to agree with that line of thinking, and that's kind of the way that the NET reasoned it out as well. Though it is interesting that some of the early Christian writers left out the Son of God there, but the fact is Jesus is kind of referred to as the Son of God explicitly later on in the Gospel of Mark. So it doesn't really change anything per se if you just remove him here. And I guess it would be more significant if you remove him from both places. But that's obviously not what happened. But I think the next one we're going to talk about is a much more interesting and more serious issue, and that is one of Jesus' miracle of healing the leper, and whether he was compassionate towards him or whether he was angry towards him. I think that is going to be a lot. I think that's more interesting, and I think much more serious of an issue, just because it really changes the meaning of the entire passage. It really gives you a different understanding of the psyche of Jesus. It really gives you a different understanding of what may have been going on in the minds of everyone there. So that change makes a huge difference. And I would argue that I would actually argue that it not only makes a difference between how you read the rest of Mark 1, but possibly the rest of Mark entirely. Just kind of how you let's see here.
Yeah. Do you want to read the passage, or do you want me to read it?
I'll let you read it. I read the last one.
Okay, so this is the passage we're talking about. It is also in Mark chapter 1. And don't worry, we're not going to go through every chapter of Mark, okay? We're just we're going to get past chapter 1 here pretty quick. Okay, so a man, this is starting at verse 40, a man with leprosy came to Jesus, and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Okay, now this is the verse in question. Jesus, I'm reading from the NIV. Jesus was indignant. Okay. The word there, it's probably more like angry, if that's the word, but in many translations it says compassion. He was moved with compassion. So Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. So the discrepancy here is what was Jesus actually feeling here? Was he moved with compassion or was he angry? So there's different translations. Like I said, the King James Version says moved with compassion. The ISV, I think that's Rob's favorite, says moved with compassion. ESV says moved with pity. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to point out that I actually have an NIV Life Application Study Bible, and I think this is more of an updated edition than the one that's on Bible Gateway. The one that's in my Bible, they have moved with compassion. So somehow along the NIV chain of transmission, they decided to change indignant with compassion. They decided to make that change in their own translation. I can show it to you if you're interested.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, let me pull that up, because I think that's actually
NIV. Yeah, the NIV was kind of holding out. They were the ones that were translating this as indignant. But by the way, that word that they translated as indignant that's really probably too soft of a word. It really means angry. Like in other passages, it's a stronger emotion. So even the use of that word was kind of strange. So yeah, I mean, I believe you, David. You don't have to pull it up.
No, but I just kind of wanted to just pull it up for my sake. This is just for my interest here.
Okay.
Part 1.
And Rob said that I might need to put something to share links. I don't know how to change any settings, but I've never made it so that people can't share links. You should be able to put a link in there.
Yeah. But if you don't, I think YouTube automatically hides links unless you're a moderator. So the way that you would change that is, so just head to the hamburger menu next to his name and make add moderator. That's how you would do it if you wanted to just give him.
On StreamYard, I can only put user in timeout or block user. So I'm not going to mess with that right now. It's going to distract me.
Okay, yes. Mark 1:41. Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." So that is at least one that is in my NIV. I'm just kind of curious, what edition of the NIV was this in?
I was reading from 2011.
That's the 2011 version. Okay, so let's see here. I got this Bible in 2013, so I'm guessing this is the 2011 edition. This might be an older edition. I don't know.
Yeah, yours might be the 1984, which is the one I really like, and I wish I could get that one now. But
Yeah,
I'm
let's see
gonna
here.
go have. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so life application study biblical copyright. I don't know. It's not those Bible rights. I'll figure it out. But yeah, my Bible,
Okay.
my NIV here. I will say right off the bat that I am not a fan of the NIV at all for a variety of reasons. But that is just an interesting switch that they did.
Yeah, Hillary's emails gives us kisses. Thanks. Okay,
Thank you.
so glad you guys are all here. Okay, so here is Mark 141 in the Codex Cyanaticus, a 4th century manuscript. And you can see here the word I've underlined is this splanknisthis. Okay, I cannot pronounce that very well. I tried to practice that before this stream, but it still got me. Okay, so this word means moved with compassion. Okay, so this is one manuscript we have, and this is, an old manuscript. And by the way, the reason I'm showing these same basically 3 manuscripts is because they're some of the most well preserved and like very easy to read. This one is also, this is a 5th century manuscript, and it's the Codex Alexandrinus. It also says splanknisthis. So that is also compassion. What's interesting about this is it actually has a variant reading I've underlined in blue. It's not just the splanknisthis that is different in this one. It actually says like Ode, and I think it says Christ. I have to zoom in, but which is different than the one we looked at here, which says just and Kai. Right before splanknisthis. So that's actually an additional variant. And so this Alexandrinus, has that variant. So that was just something I noticed when I was going through these. Okay, and then here is the Codex Bezae. And this is where we have the disagreement here. The word I've underlined is orgisthis, that he became angry. So this is, definitely a variant between texts. And so this is where the kind of decision making comes in. And David, do you want to say something about the issues of why some translators chose compassion and why some chose anger?
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of go through the line of thinking here between scholars, is that it is more likely that a scribe would have softened the language from he was angry to say, okay, we don't like that he was angry, so we're going to make him be compassionate, than it would to go in the reverse. So that is the line of thinking from Bart Ehrman and many other scholars, myself included. Because what motivation would a scribe have to change the words he was compassionate to he was angry, or he became angry? With that, those are kind of the way that scholars kind of view this here.
Yes.
Now,
but there is one line of argument that could go the other direction,
right.
Which is there's a couple of places where like Jesus is angry about something else, like regarding a healing. I think when the man brought his son to be like he needed help casting out a demon and the disciples couldn't do it, then it says like Jesus was angry. So it may have been trying to match up with Jesus's reaction there. But I tend to agree that with the, that it may have been the angry.
Yeah. Then you would have to ask the question, why was Jesus angry and all that? And it brings up some really interesting theological questions, but it really changes the understanding of this whole passage. It really changes how you understand the psyche of Jesus and what was actually going on.
Now, what for you makes it difficult if Jesus was angry?
So I don't really have any major difficulties either way, but I guess if Jesus actually was angry, the obvious question would be why. Like, here's a person who is in need of healing, desperately searching for healing, and he's coming up to him because he believes he's the only one who can heal him. Why would he be angry about that? Why would he? Why wouldn't he be more or less moved with compassion? So.
Yeah, well, when I read that, and I mean, my NIV does say indignant, so I'm not used to seeing Jesus moved with compassion because I mostly do read out of the NIV. So, but that never really bothered me. I guess the reason is because I don't see Jesus being angry with the person, but more like this is like kind of Jesus being angry with the state of affairs of the world. Like, so I still see Jesus as being compassionate. So I don't think it like excludes Jesus being, I mean, I don't think Jesus is like not being compassionate because he has this emotion of anger, because he heals the person, right? So clearly he's showing compassion to the person. He's not like angry and sending the person away. So that tells me, it doesn't say here that like what the object of Jesus's anger was. It doesn't say that he was angry with the person. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe he was just kind of frustrated with all the people coming to see him. He was just angry, like, I want to go home. Who knows? But interesting comment once again from Sentinel Apologetics. A later variant anger arose from a phonetic confusion between the two Aramaic words. Ethrachman had pity, and Ethraim, he was angered. So otherwise, all the manuscripts would have had compassion. The word for anger is literally a one-off due to the Aramaic confusion of the gutturals we had described, which is actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, actually, and that is, I think, a good argument for the one for the compassion reading is actually all of the manuscripts that we have, except 3. There's the one that I showed. Which one was that? I have to go back to it. Yeah, it was the Codex Bezae, right? The Codex Bezae is the only Greek manuscript that we have that has angry. And so there's a good reason to translate it as compassion. Now, there's also 2 other Latin manuscripts that read angry. But there's good manuscript evidence that we should translate it as compassion.
Right. So. And back to the NET himself, they put on here, they emphasize the external evidence is so overwhelmingly for compassion that only solid internal reasoning could overturn it. On the other hand, various creative arguments have been offered for accidental changes in the early transmissions of the text, from generally relatively more about the ingenuity of scholars in the Olympian suggestions, but lack conviction. I'm gonna actually share this screen real quick.
Okay.
I'm gonna kind of share this comment from Mark 1. This is the NET share screen.
Okay, and by the way, I love how Rob just has all this information at his fingertips. Like Rob must have like an eidetic memory, and I mean, it's just he's amazing at how much he.
I love Rob. Good. If you're not subscribed to Sentinel Apologetics, go subscribe to him. Well,
yes.
Looks like
okay, so I got your screen here.
Yeah. Sentimental
Okay.
apologetics. Others have manuscripts, but that anger, but that dates to 375 to 450. Cyanaticus has compassion, that dates to 325. So the earlier manuscript has compassion. The reading counted almost the entire trans is moved with compassion. Just as important to history, almost, and here we go. The 2nd century Dicasteron by Titan almost surely spoke of Jesus' anger here, which would show that the textual variation goes back much further. On the other hand, the external evidence is so overwhelmingly for compassion that only solid internal reason could overturn it. On the other hand, various creative arguments that have been offered for accidental changes in the early transmission of the text from compassion to anger, or anger to compassion, generally reveal more about the ingenuity of the scholar than the authenticity of the text. Inner Greek, Inner Latin, and Inner Syriac accidental changes have all been suggested, but they lack conviction. And examinations of Armin's case for anger, who argues from an Inner Greek corruption. It is possible that the reading either was suggested arose from confusion. This is the argument that Rob used, arose from the confusion between the similar words in Aramaic. It remains far more difficult to account for a change from moved with compassion to moved with anger than to envision a copyist softening the moved with anger to moved with compassion. Against this, it is asserted that it is difficult to explain why scribes would be prone to softening the text here, but not in Mark 3:5 or Mark 10:14, where Jesus is also said to be angry or indignant. However, as notes, ignore the fact that in those passages, unlike here, there was obvious cause for anger. And the parallels with Matthew and Luke have neither anger nor compassion here, so basically we're kind of stuck. We can't use the other Gospels as our guide because they simply don't use either word. The simplest explanation for this omission is that their copies of Mark read, and the other evangelists simply deleted it. So the copies of Mark read anger, and the other gospel writers deleted it in their text. Nevertheless, a decision in this case is not easy. Perhaps the best defense of angry reading is Martin Aaron's A Leper in the Hands of the Angry Jesus. For discussion showing the evidence of bibliography, see D.B. Wallace textual criticisms and the criterion for embarrassment. So very interesting stuff. I tend to lean more towards the Jesus being angry.
Mm-hmm. And like David, when you said a lot of this stuff is related to your deconversion. So is having these kind of textual variants a problem for you? Like, did this disturb your faith? Because I know you grew up kind of with this very strong biblical inerrancy.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely grew up with the KJV only Bible thumping conservative evangelical wing of missionary Baptists. But for me, studying these manuscripts, realized that, okay, the problems are much deeper than what we're being told. We're being told that at least if you're an independent fundamental Baptist church, and you're growing up believing that the King James Version is the only Bible translation, and all the other Bibles remove verses and all that type of evil stuff. But then you actually study, okay, well, why are all the other translations removing these verses? Then you kind of get into, okay, this is why they're removing them. And it's not because they're being removed here, but they're being added elsewhere. And for me, I think that it shows that, and we've seen in later today and in later episodes when we're talking more in depth about this, is that scribes were willing to deliberately add to the New Testament. They were willing to deliberately alter what they thought was the Word of God. And that's something that I'm not okay with. Is that how is it that these New Testament Christians that believe to be the absolute truth, why would they even think about altering the words that they think are inspired? And why would they even dare to add something in that wasn't there originally? And that's kind of the questions that got me thinking and kind of got the ball moving towards my deconversion.
I see. Okay. Well, should we jump to Mark 9?
Sure. Mark 9. What verse is that again? Mark 9.
Mark 9:29. The passage we're going to talk about is where, let me just go to it and I'll read it. But it's a variant that. Go ahead.
Okay. He told him this kind can come out only by prayer. No others say prayer and fasting. Only by
right.
prayer.
So this is when Jesus casts a demon out of someone, and then the disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? Because the disciples had tried first. And Jesus replied, this kind can come out only by prayer, or only by prayer and fasting. And this is a pretty big difference, right?
Oh, yeah. Because this is a huge difference. Because if you're original disciple here, basically what Jesus is saying is, hey, if you're trying to cast out demons, this kind of demon can only be cast out through prayer or through prayer and fasting. So do I have to fast when I cast this kind of demon out, or do I not have to fast? So that's really a huge difference. And if the disciples were praying but not fasting, maybe that's why the demon wasn't coming out. Or if they were fasting but not praying, well, maybe that's why they weren't coming out. So this is actually a much more significant core issue, especially if you're an exorcist trying to cast out a demon.
Right. Okay.
I'll just read. And again, I love the NET, and this is the commentary they use. Most witnesses, even early and excellent ones, have an fasting after prayer here, but this seems to be a motivated reasoning due to the church's emphasis on fasting. The most significant witnesses, as well as a few others, lack and fasting, when a good reason for the omission is difficult to find, argues strongly for the shorter reading. So in that case, it's kind of like a case of Occam's razor. What is more likely that they would? What is more likely? Would a scribe add something here or take it away?
Yeah, and so I'm going to pull up the slides that I have on this. So again, here's the Codex Bezae, 5th century, and I've circled kind of the verse, and I've put a square and a star around the word fasting. So this one, Codex Bezae, does have the word fasting, and it looks like it's just a normal part of the verse, nothing funny about it. Then we have Codex Cyanaticus, and I don't know how well you can see this, but you might have to zoom in on your screen. Did I make a zoom in portion? I don't think I did on this one, no. Okay, but actually in Codex Cyanaticus, prayer is written large, and then fasting is written in small letters. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's the last words that I've put in that box there. So prayer goes across the bottom, and then right after that, there's a word in small letters, and that's fasting. Now, that may be because it was added later. More likely, the scribe was just trying to fit the word in on the line. I really don't know, actually, what's happening there, but I mean, it is questionable, but that's a 4th century manuscript. And then we have the Codex Vaticanus, which does not have fasting. So Codex Vaticanus is a 5th century manuscript, and I've underlined the word prayer. And then you can see after that, it just goes on to the next verse. There's no and fasting there at all. So those are just some examples. So and this one I think is a pretty tough one to figure out. And like you said, it does make a difference, a significant difference in how we understand exorcism. So, but it probably doesn't hurt to fast, right? But it is questionable whether or not Jesus said that they come out only by prayer and fasting. So, yeah. Did you want to say anything else about that one, David?
No, but yeah, I thought that's actually, I haven't thought about that one in a long time. And so thank you for bringing that up. I would have totally forgotten about it. But I do find that to be quite interesting, is that if you're a first century Christian or a second century Christian trying to exorcise a demon and you come across this demonic kind, well, you might be in for a bit of a trouble if you pick the wrong manuscript and go with that reading.
Yep. Okay, well, our last one, and there may be other manuscript variations in Mark that we're not bringing up, but we're going to jump to probably the biggest one, which is the end of Mark, which has been very controversial. A lot of people are already familiar with this, especially because in most modern English translations, at least in the popular English translations, most of the time now they're putting the ending of Mark in italics, and kind of saying this isn't in the earliest manuscripts. So what are your thoughts on this, David?
Well, I definitely think this is probably, of all the issues with the Gospels and the issues with textual variants, I actually think this is probably the number one most significant out of all of them. When you read the resurrection accounts, Mark 16 really ends in verse number 8. Then they went out and ran from the tomb, for terror and bewilderment has seized them, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And that is how the Gospel of Mark ends. Now, obviously, there is a lot of motivation for scribes to say, wait a minute, you can't just end the Gospel here. You got to go on. You got to tell what happened after Jesus was resurrected. And obviously, this leads to logical questions. Okay, Mark, you say that they didn't tell anyone. Well, if they didn't tell anyone, how are you telling the story? So, obviously, they must have told someone later on down the road, or that this is simply a later tradition that developed over time. But there's actually, that is the short ending. But there's actually two endings of Mark that go on. The first is the long ending, the traditional ending that goes from 9 to 20. I'm going to pull this up real quick.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read this. And this here I am going to read from the NIV. When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, of whom he had driven out 7 demons. She went and told those who have been with him and who are mourning and weeping. When they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they did not believe it. Afterwards, Jesus appeared in different form to 2 of them while they were walking in the country. These returned and reported it to the rest, but they did not believe them. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for the lack of their faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons, they will speak in new tongues, and they will pick up snakes with their hands. And when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people, and they will get well." After that, the Lord Jesus spoke to them, and he was taken into heaven, and he sat at the right hand of God. Then the disciples went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them and confirmed the word by his sign that accompanied them. And it's interesting that that's the long ending, but I guess I would call this the medium ending. The other alternative ending They then quickly reported all these instructions to those around Peter. After this, Jesus himself also sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. Amen. That is an alternative ending for the Gospel of Mark, which I find to be quite interesting. And it's pretty obvious. I think it's pretty obvious to most scholars that verse 8 is where the original Gospel ended, just because there's so much motivation for scribes to actually go in and add to that ending.
And, that really bums me out because that part says I can drink poison and not die.
Yes, and you know what? I was actually going to go right there because there are churches in the United States today, primarily in the South and the Appalachian region, that part of their worship service involves deliberately getting themselves bit by venomous snakes and drinking deadly poison, and then rejecting medical care and praying that God will heal them. They're called snake handling churches, and and they use the ending of Mark here to justify their practices. So that is basically the way that they say, hey, the ending of Mark says we can do these things. This is a sign to the world that we're legitimate. But this textual variation is ending up getting people killed.
Yes. So I don't recommend drinking poison or getting bit by a snake, purposely anyway. But, we do have an example of Paul getting bit by a snake, a deadly snake, and having no ill effect. And so maybe that was part of the influence of, why this was written this way. I don't know. But yeah. So, but I have pulled up some manuscripts here. So this is the Codex Cyanaticus, and I hope I zoomed in on this, but you can see this is the part, the square that I've made red. That is the end of the Gospel of Mark in the Codex Cyanaticus, and it ends with Ephobonto-gar, which is that they were afraid. So, and then this whole column is left blank. I mean, this, I'd have to zoom in. I think it says the end of the Gospel of Mark. But basically the Cyanaticus, 4th century, our earliest complete manuscript of the New Testament does not have anything beyond verse 8.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, good. I zoomed in. Okay, good. So yeah, you have it. You can see it close up there. That is clearly the ending. Now, did you want to say something about it?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to read something from Christian apologists, and these are conservative Christian apologists,
Okay.
and here's what they are saying about this ending. Not sure if you know who Matt Slick is from CARM, the Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry.
I hear his name a lot, but I don't know if I know him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's dispute over Mark 16, verse 9 to 20, whether or not it should be included in the New Testament. It is found in many old manuscripts, but is submitted into the earliest complete copies of the Bible. Additionally, there is another ending to Mark and some manuscript substitutes. The fact remains that these 12 verses are under dispute, and it is necessary to spotlight the issue when dealing with the historical reliability and inspiration of the text in the New Testament manuscripts. Some scholars have asserted that the ending is a different style and seems to suggest that Jesus appeared in different forms, which could be problematic since Jesus rose in the same body he died in. Also, Mark 16:16 can be interpreted to mean that baptism is a part of salvation. And Mark 16.
By the way, I want to clear up something I said earlier. I realized I made a mistake when I said that the Codex Alexandrinus. I think I said that it was from the Alexandrian text group, and probably because of the name, but it's actually from the Byzantine text group. So sorry for the confusion.
Yeah. Oh, this is actually a really good comment. Jamie Russell, could it suggest that the writers of Mark was aware of what happened to Paul and some of the scribes thought that this may have been added on as basically tacking from Paul's experience in the Book of Acts? So this might be actually an interesting comment. I think that might actually be the case.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so did you finish reading what you... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is the second one. This is from gotquestions.org, another Christian apologetics website. Again, a very conservative website. Older and more accurate manuscripts have been discovered and affirm that 9 verse 20 were not in the original Gospel of Mark. In addition, the 4th century church father Ebesius and Jerome noted that almost all Greek manuscripts available to them lacked verse 9 through 20, although they doubtlessly knew other endings existed. In the 2nd century, Justin Martyr and Titan knew about other endings. Irenaeus, also in AD 150 to 200, must have known about this long ending because he quotes verse 19 from it. So the early church fathers knew of the added verses, but even by the 4th century, Eusebius said that the Greek manuscripts did not include these in the originals. The internal evidence from this passage also casts doubt on Mark as the author. For one thing, the transition between verse 8 and 9 is abrupt and awkward. The Greek word translated now that begins in verse 9 should link into what follows, as the use of the word now does in other Synoptic Gospels. However, what follows does not continue the story of the women referred to in verse 8, describing instead Jesus' appearance in Mary Magdalene. There is no transition there, but rather an abrupt and bizarre change, lacking the continuity typical of Mark's narrative. The author should be continuing to the story of the women based upon the word now, not jumping to the appearance of Mary Magdalene. Further, for Mark to introduce Mary Magdalene here as though for the very first time is odd because she had already been introduced earlier. And also with the issue of the vocabulary. So that's from Got Questions. Basically, the vast majority of even conservative scholars, they're starting to realize that Mark 16, verse 9 through 20 is not original to the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah, I wanted to look at now, although there is, manuscript evidence, like this is from the 5th century, right? And this shows the end of Mark. And so it ends with, the long ending, the signs that accompanied it or the signs that followed. So you can see, the ending right there. Let's see if I zoomed in on it. And I kind of this is the Alexandrinus. I went and I underlined where Mark 16:8 is and where the other, where Cyanaticus ends with verse 8. And I don't really see anything here that makes it seem like it doesn't belong, like the next part of it. So that's kind of interesting. And then here's the Codex Bezae. So now this one has a little bit of a difference because it says the signs that followed, and then it adds amen.
Yeah, that is actually really interesting. And you can always tell. I don't know, like there's a huge change in the color of the ink here.
That's where it says that part where the ink changes colors says like this is the end of the Gospel of Mark and the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles.
Interesting. And then, so interesting. So it looks like that in some earlier codices, maybe Acts actually followed Mark instead of Luke.
Yep, in Codex Bezae. Now, in a lot of them preserve the order that we have today, but in Codex Bezae, I think the order goes Matthew, John, and actually I discovered this because what was I doing? I was going through the manuscripts and trying to find the end of Mark. So I went to Luke and I looked at the page before, expecting to find the end of Mark, and it wasn't there. It was the end of John. I was like, what is going on here? So I ended up realizing that Codex Bezae goes Matthew, John, Luke, Mark, and then Acts.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so there's definitely some significant changes. The order of books haven't really been standardized yet, and so that is definitely something that is going to come much later. So yeah, that is actually really interesting. I actually did not know that. And that's
Don't
why
you love this stuff?
Yes,
I
exactly.
find this
And
so
that is
much fun.
and that is why I love doing these streams, because you always learn something new. These are always friendly conversations, not a debate, not an argument, but just a really fun informal chat between two nerds.
I don't often get called a nerd, but I like that. But yeah, I love looking at the manuscripts. It's so fun to just go that far back into history. And I mean, even just like the handwriting, like, thank you for having nice handwriting.
Yes.
You look at some of these manuscripts and they're so hard to read. That's why I kind of keep choosing these same ones, because they're good representatives and they're like not hard to find the right verse, because you can actually read the handwriting and stuff. So yeah.
Yes. And that's why I really love these streams. And so do you want to say anything about the ending of Mark? What compels you? Do you find the ending of Mark to be authentic, or which one do you think to be most likely?
Well, I think it's questionable enough that I will not be dogmatic about it.
Yeah.
Like, so like I'm not gonna take a stance either way, because I think
Right.
there's pretty strong evidence that, and you mentioned some of it, because the writing style is different. The way that the narrative goes doesn't really, there's a lot of things that are different about it. So I think there's strong evidence that it was added.
Yeah.
But now that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not authoritative or that it's not inspired. So if somebody was like, insisting to me, no, I believe this, it's inspired, I'm not going to argue with them. Like, I'm not going to be like, no, it's not inspired. No, it's not, like either way, I'm fine with it. Like, I don't think it changes Christian doctrine, except
Right.
I will mention this though. This passage at the end of Mark is the one place where it's kind of sounds like somebody has to be water baptized to be saved. Now,
Yeah.
There's nowhere else in the New Testament. There are places that mention baptism. There's one in Peter that says like the baptism that saves you or something like that. But this one kind of, whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. You won't find that in any of the other gospels.
Right. So this seems to be a very explicit, you must be baptized in order to be saved.
Yeah, well, and that depends on your interpretation of the word baptism, because we have the word baptism. We always think of it as a formal ceremony in water.
Right.
But actually, there's many baptisms mentioned. Baptism is used in a lot of different ways in the New Testament. And so we don't know that this baptism is necessarily referring to water, because it could be baptism into Christ, which is something that's used a lot. Baptism into the Holy Spirit,
Right. So that is definitely something to be interesting. But I think the most logical interpretation is to read it plainly as baptism by immersion in water. I think that is probably the most logically consistent way of reading it. But yeah, that would be a pretty significant Christian core doctrine. Do you have to be baptized to be saved or not? Christians have been fighting and killing each other over that question for many centuries, and it's for one reason alone, and that's the Bible simply isn't clear. do you have to be baptized or not? The Bible simply isn't clear. And I would say that's probably another reason why I deconverted and why I had such a hard time with Christianity and Gospels and all. Is like, then you really have picked a less clear, like you could have been a little bit more clear with what you're talking about. Because I don't think that Christian doctrine is really communicated effectively in the New Testament.
Okay. Well,
But that's probably a topic for a whole other discussion.
I was going to say, maybe we can talk about that in depth.
Yeah,
but what are your...
Yeah, so...
what are your concluding thoughts about the end of Mark?
So I'm definitely on the line that it's definitely not authentic. I, along with most other scholars, would say that... well, I'm not a scholar, so... I and most scholars would say that it ends in verse number 8. That is when, and that is pretty much the conclusion of the Gospel of Mark. What does this actually prove? If that's the case, well, it proves that Christian writers had no problem playing with the Word of God. They had no problem tampering with the text in order to suit their theological doctrines. That is the key takeaway. That is my big takeaway when I look at all of these stuff. And this is just one episode, and we're gonna probably do another episode next week or the week after when we talk about others and other books, because this is just the Gospel of Mark. We're just getting started.
Yep, but it's not going to be next week because I'm going out of town. So
yes.
Anyway,
so next week. So not next week, but probably the week after. We'll talk about maybe some of the stuff in John or Luke. But this is stuff that I find so fascinating. But would you agree, hypothetically speaking, would you agree that if the original Gospel of Mark in verse 8, would you agree that that means that Christian scribes were deliberately tampering with the text?
Well, I guess I have just a more flexible way of thinking about it, which is kind of like, this is, I wouldn't think of it as Christian scribes deliberately tampering with the text, but as like the Christian community in some way wanted a better ending. And so they added one. And for me, that's not really a problem. But I mean, I understand. I feel like you and I we're kind of like have a different basis.
Right.
Like we have a different expectation.
Right.
And so I think you're coming from a background that's very rigid when it comes to the Bible. Right. And so to have any deviation from your expectation is a blow.
Right.
And
but it's not just the expectation. I think it's overall an expectation of basic textual integrity. Is if you're God and you're trying to communicate with people, would you really allow it to happen where they were literally changing what was in the text just to suit their needs or their wants? And that's something that I find so troublesome, is that if this really is the Word of God, why change it?
Well, I mean, do you think God wrote the rest of it, like the stuff that wasn't tampered with, so to speak? Do you think God wrote it?
Oh no, I was just saying, but if you were God, like what? Obviously, God didn't literally write the Gospels. He didn't literally write any of it. Inspired human authors, but again, why the change? And I kind of find it almost deceptive in a way from early Christians to actually change the text in such a way. But we'll go more in depth next time when we're talking about the next one. Do you want to talk about Luke or John next?
We'll discuss that afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, David. And I guess I want to say some concluding words to any Christians who may happen to be watching. if you're hearing for the first time, or you've come into contact with these ideas that that these variations are an issue that you haven't wrestled with before, and you're just coming to this, I hope it doesn't cause you to have a problem in your faith, because actually there's so much textual evidence for the Bible. It's quite unchanged as far as variations go. I mean, we're picking out some of these variations, but really in the New Testament, you could take all of the variants, the places that have variations, and just completely toss them out of the Bible, and the Christian message would still be there. It's not, it does not change the core doctrines of our faith. So I hope that you'll be encouraged as we go along, and that this will just increase your knowledge and awareness of where we're getting the text and where we're getting the translations, and actually be a benefit to your faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, of course, encourage all Christians and atheists to really examine these issues and really study it, because I think these things are actually very important to study.
Now, Cameron says flexibility with the Bible, but would you be as flexible with the Quran? Well, I've read the Quran. I'm not really in a position to be one way or the other about the Quran, because I don't hold the Quran as an inspired text. So, I mean, I would be willing to take the interpretation of those who do. If they take a flexible interpretation of things in the Quran, I would accept their interpretations and different things. So I wouldn't need to be, inflexible or rigid with the Quran. So, yeah. Do you want to say anything about that, David?
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with the Quran. I've tried reading the Quran, but it's just it's just I just can't get into it. I'm sorry. It's not like for all the issues of coherency you have with the Bible, the Quran is probably the most incoherent book I've ever tried to read. Yep.
Okay, well,
thank you. Yep. On camera, this is the word of God. Why change it? That was the best. But well, thank you, Cameron.
Yeah, Cameron says, if this is the word of God, why change it? Did you want to go ahead and say something about that?
Yeah, that was the best. Well, yeah, thank you, Cameron. I really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone who tuned in. Thank you everyone who decided to join us. This is going to be a multi-part series, so we were deciding, okay, which one are we going to talk about? Just because there's so much to talk about. And then we decided, okay, perhaps we should just do like one book at a time, just because there's just so much.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you, David. Please go subscribe to David Neff. The link to his channel is in the description. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, very well.
Night.
Have a wonderful evening. Be well.